Secondhand Lions is about two older brothers who are living together when their lives are interrupted by the arrival of their great nephew, Walter. Before Walter arrived, these brothers were pretty much set in their ways. They spent most of their time chasing off salesmen and planting a garden that didn't actually grow anything. But Walter helped them start living again. They started buying things from the salesmen, including a lion, thus the title, Secondhand Lions. There's a lot that can be said about the movie Secondhand Lions. It contains themes of war and themes of love, themes of betrayal and loyalty. But perhaps the biggest theme is that life is to be lived, even to the end. Secondhand Lions can give us a greater understanding of the aging process and can help us understand some ways that we can help people as they go through this process.
First, let's talk about Walter. For a majority of the movie, Walter is depicted to be in the stage of middle childhood, which is about between the ages of 6 and 12. Come here, Malachi. This is my son, Malachi. Malachi is 11 years old, so he is right in about the same stage that Walter is. So we're going to pretend that he is actually Walter. Hi, Walter.
Hi.
How you doing today?
Wonderful.
All right, that's great. So there are a lot of changes that occur during this stage of development. Not only is a child in this stage growing physically, but he's also growing emotionally. There's other emotions. Yeah, very good. Can you be surprised? Scared? All right, wonderful. Growing emotionally. He's also growing intellectually. Gotta do your schoolwork so you can learn. And he's growing spiritually. Now, a child at this stage who has successfully attached to his parents in an earlier stage will have completed that and be ready for the next task of development, which is industry versus inferiority.
What's industry?
I am so glad you asked. So industry is defined as a desire to learn new skills and complete meaningful work. This is something that they're able to do, and it really takes a lot of time during this stage of childhood, because they're involved in things like education and sports and just learning a lot of new skills. So in the movie, Walter shows that he is successfully completing the task of industry by the way that he is able to help his uncles with the gardening, as well as the way that he is so eager to and learns to take after and take care of his pet lion. Aw, nice lion. Because he is successfully completing this task, he's showing the prime adaptive ego quality of competence, or a belief that he has the ability to figure things out and to do what is required of him in a certain situation. He has confidence that he can do the tasks that are required of him.
Do it.
What did you say?
I can do it.
Yes, you can.
Faith also plays a role in Walter's development. At first, he shows misplaced faith in his mom. He trusts that she's where she says he is and that she's going to come back for him. But later in the movie, however, he has to decide to place faith in his uncles. There's a point where he decides that he's going to believe their story, and that belief actually becomes stronger than the belief and faith that he has in his mom, as demonstrated when his mom comes back, tries to get him to reveal where the money is. We can see the moment when Walter decides he's going to place his faith in his uncles instead of his mom. And the beautiful thing about it is that at the end of the movie, his faith is rewarded when he finds out that his uncle's stories were true.
Come on, pal, you don't believe all that, do you?
Sure I do. You? Mr. Doubting Thomas? Here Stan's got actual evidence, and you believe that Africa crap?
Yes. Yes, I do.
When I was a boy, my grandfather told me such stories.
Your grandfather?
Very wealthy sheik. He used to love to tell me stories about his wild youth. Amazing, unbelievable stories all about two brothers helping Garth McCann, the most valiant and brave men, huh?
Walter also shows throughout the movie that he is highly resilient. While we don't know much about Walter's childhood, before he shows up at his uncle's house, we can assume that it's been pretty rough. His mom is unstable, and after the death of his dad, she's moved from one relationship to the next. His mom often lies to him and doesn't seem to truly care what happens to him. In fact, her prime motive for dropping Walter off with the uncles appears to be to use Walter as a way to get the uncles money. With a background like this, it's amazing that Walter is the way he is. While it's possible for children to go through difficult experiences to develop resiliency, it would be more realistic for Walter to be insecurely attached and struggling with issues related to trauma.
In the movie Secondhand Lions, Walter actually seems to have been going through a lot of situations that would be considered adverse childhood experiences. And these could have negative impacts on him as a child and as he grows up. It could impact him in his development. The main thing that we're seeing is emotional neglect from his mom. For example, his mom doesn't really seem to be concerned about his emotional welfare or even his physical well-being. She's just kind of dropping him off at the uncles for the summer. And this seems to be a pattern with her. She's also emotionally distant, and she's really just using Walter to get to the money that the uncles have. So all of this is very similar to how childhood trauma would be in impacting him and could actually impact negatively his development. Some of the outcomes that could be experienced in somebody who is going through a situation like this is difficulties in social skills, humor, self-regulation, and emotional awareness.
The parent-child relationship is still extremely important to a child at Walter's stage of development. In fact, parents remain the child's primary attachment figure throughout middle childhood. We can see Walter's desire to be attached to his mom during the movie when he tries to call her, when he runs to the mailbox to see if she has written, and when he expresses excitement upon finally receiving a letter. However, the mom does not meet the needs that Walter has, and this lack of support could lead to a greater likelihood of depression when Walter reaches adolescence.
The neglect from his mom is not the only risk factor that Walter has. We know from the movie that his dad has died at some point. Kathleen Nader has a book called Handbook of Trauma, Traumatic Loss, and Adversity in Children, where she looks at some of the risk factors that can lead to increasing trauma in children that will require treatment. And one of those is a stressful environment. And I think that Walter's definitely been in a stressful environment. Another one is a surviving parent with high stress levels or mental issues. Does that describe Walter's mom? I think so. Next one is an unavailable parent. And we definitely see that Walter's mom is unavailable for him emotionally and physically. And then also the sense of being a burden, which I think Walter could easily pick up on because he's just being passed along to whoever could possibly take care of him. So we can see from that Walter's situation really does require treatment.
Help me! Help me! Help!
So how does a counselor help somebody who's going through situations like Walter? Well, it starts with, as with everything, by building a strong therapeutic relationship, building empathy and trust. And then you can use trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy to help them kind of look at those thoughts and beliefs that they have because of what has happened, and to help them change those maladaptive thoughts and beliefs into something that's more adaptive and that will help them to grow. One technique that I found that I really liked is a technique where you give a child a rope, and the counselor helps the child with this. And the rope is kind of like a lifeline. It represents their life, and it can be a straight line. You lay it out and you look at that, and then at the end it doesn't keep going at the end because the end represents the future. And then you give the child different colors, flowers and stones, and the flowers can represent those positive experiences and the stones represent those negative experiences. And together with the child, you put those flowers and those stones in the right spots, and you talk about the situations, and you help the child to work through those situations. Along the way, you can help by writing these things down and helping to keep documentation of it. And then also you can encourage a child to do their own drawings of it, to draw out their headlines, and to look not only at what has happened, but how they've been resilient through it and how they can be resilient in the future. And then at the end of the whole thing, the rope can be stretched out, and you can help the child to come up with some hopes and dreams for the future, recognizing that the situations of the past don't have to dictate their future, that they can overcome, they can be resilient, and they can have hope for a future.
However, as mentioned earlier, Walter does demonstrate that he has resiliency. Some children have shown resiliency in the face of difficult situations, and it's been suggested that perhaps it's because of the way they perceive the experiences. If they look at it as a challenge and they see how they've been able to overcome the challenge, that might be, and how they've been able to help people through it, that might be something that helps him to develop resiliency. And in Walter's case, he did overcome the challenges, and he was helping other people as he was helping Uncle Hub and Uncle Garth. So he did overcome, and he did show resiliency. Even at the end of the movie, when we see him in probably about middle adulthood, we can see that he has adapted really well. And in a sense, he's using art therapy as he makes comics and shows the story of his life and is able to live that out. So he definitely has resiliency. Walter definitely deserves a medal because of showing great resiliency in the face of hardships and difficulties. Walter, you have earned our Emotional Health Medal and resiliency.
Remember when we said we'd stay together now?
Next up is our analysis of Walter's mom, May. Now I'm going to put May in the early 30s, so putting her about in the category of early adulthood. As such, she should have already accomplished several developmental tasks, including attachment, autonomy, initiative, industry, and identity. She should be ready to start her next phase, which is intimacy versus isolation. However, it appears that May has not successfully completed any of these.
Walter, you're going to have to learn to trust people, or you're going to grow up bitter and disappointed.
It's interesting that May would say that to Walter, because if Walter's having difficulties with trust, it's largely responsibility of his mom and the way that she has not allowed him to attach because of her behavior. May seems to be, instead, a person who trusts too much, or rather, trusts the wrong people. We get the idea that May has been in a string of relationships, that she does whatever it is her boyfriend at that time wants her to do, that she's unable to live independently, that she doesn't understand the value of hard work, and that by being stuck on everyone, she can't really get stuck on anybody. She's unable to form an intimate relationship. Even at the end, we see Stan come in and she's ready to go with him to Las Vegas. We see that she's also struggling with resiliency. She is not resilient. She's not positively adapting to the change in her life, and any faith that she has in others is misplaced. In order for May to be able to complete any further developmental tasks, she has to be able to be truly intimate with another person, and we don't see that happening right now. May is truly stuck. The main developmental tasks of early adulthood all go around the idea of relationships. Intimate partner relationships, worker relationships in a career setting, and parent relationships with your child. These three relationships become the structure of the lifestyle that an early adult adopts. May, however, seems to be stuck in an earlier developmental stage and thus unable to develop and maintain relationships in these areas. While she finds partners, the relationships do not involve true intimacy, and she even has difficulty in her relationship with Walter, as demonstrated by her pattern of placing her own desires above those of her son. This also shows that she is unwilling to truly embrace the role of parent. Again, she is stuck in an early developmental stage. The behaviors that we see May exhibiting in this movie also make me wonder if she might possibly have a personality disorder, specifically borderline personality disorder, which is described in the DSM-5 as a pervasive pattern of instability in interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affect, and marked impulsivity, beginning in early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. We see a lot of this going on. She needs to meet some different criteria for it, and take a look at what we see in the movie. We see frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. Well, it kind of seems like that's going on with her. We see a pattern of unstable relationships. It sounds very much like she's had these relationships before, like she just goes wherever the guy is. We see identity disturbance, impulsivity. Look at how she drops Walter off, or how she's willing just to go to Las Vegas with Stan. She's only known him for a little while. And chronic feelings of emptiness, even though they're not specifically noticed in the movie, I would guess that those chronic feelings of emptiness might be there. So how would a counselor help May? Well, first of all, a counselor would want to use something like cognitive behavioral therapy, which would look at her maladaptive beliefs and those deep-held beliefs that are at the center of what's going on. Some of the common things a person with borderline personality disorder have could be dependence, emotional deprivation, abandonment, mistrust, and competence. She would need to be challenged in these beliefs, and she needs to learn to replace them with adaptive beliefs and behaviors. A counselor would also want to help her identify her triggers. What seems to cause her to behave impulsively? What are the events that lead her to make an impulsive decision? And first, a counselor can help her identify her unhealthy patterns and then teach her new techniques to use in response to the triggers. What are some new responses that she can do? For example, for May, it's possible that her fear of abandonment serves as a trigger, causing her to do whatever it takes to keep a guy. Cognitive behavioral therapy would help May discover her triggers, evaluate and challenge the cognitive distortions related to those triggers, and then learn techniques to stop her current responses. She could then contemplate the consequences and learn to choose better adaptive responses. Other things that might be helpful working with May would be identity work. Who is she without a boyfriend? Since a person needs to be confident in his or her identity in order to experience intimacy, May will need to work on this issue or she will remain stuck. May currently has what's called a fragile identity. She doesn't really know who she is, and she often loses herself in other people, specifically her boyfriends. Helping her discover who she truly is will help her eventually be able to experience intimacy. And then finally, parenting training and job skills training could be very helpful for May. Let's teach her how to be a strong parent for Walter, and let's help her discover skills that can help her find a job so she doesn't have to rely on a boyfriend or her uncle's money to help her get a house and a stable life. Now let's talk about Stan, May's new boyfriend. We're going to place Stan somewhere in the early adulthood, middle adulthood stage. When we first are introduced to Stan, we're given the impression that he has a good job and that he is successfully managing his career, a task of middle adulthood. However, as we watch him further, we see that things aren't always as they appear. He has no problem lying to Walter. He appears to be only after money, and he quickly becomes abusive when he's challenged. He could possibly even have an antisocial personality disorder. For our study of Stan, however, we're going to focus on his abusive behavior. It is quite possible that Stan himself experienced great difficulties in childhood, leading him to become abusive and overbearing as an adult. There are risk factors that predict adult partner violence, including exposure to parental domestic violence, exposure to abuse or harsh discipline as a child, substance use, poor educational achievement, and adolescent association with deviant peers. Whatever the reason, this behavior has developed as we get the impression that Stan has hit May on more than one occasion, and he quickly resorts to violence with Walter. I would classify Stan as a generally violent antisocial batterer. This type of batterer displays antisocial and aggressive behavior. They're often self-centered and self-absorbed, and they lack empathy. Their view of others is often driven by a desire to get what they want. These other people are simply objects that will help them reach their goals. In the case of Stan, both May and Walter are objects that will help him get rich. GVA batterers often display a dismissive, avoidant attachment style, which we see in Stan, as he has a pretty high view of himself, but a low view of everyone else.
Help! 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 Help!
So how can a counselor help Stan? Well, first of all, whatever counseling approach is used needs to be highly individualized. The counselor needs to gain an understanding into Stan and his issues in order to meet him where he is. Stan also needs to be motivated to change. If he doesn't see an issue with his behavior, and if he doesn't want to change it, change will be very difficult. A lot of early counseling will be using psychoeducation to help increase Stan's motivation for change. The counselor can help increase Stan's awareness of abuse and its effects and help him make a commitment to change. Together, the counselor and client can then look at past incidents of abuse. What are the scenarios that often lead him to respond with violence? They can develop hypotheses about what it is that causes the abusive actions and what function the violence seems to serve. What are the beliefs and attitudes that Stan has that support the use of violence? What are some non-violent solutions that could be used instead? Stan could also probably benefit from relationship skills training. Later in treatment, the counselor is going to want to also address any issues of earlier unresolved trauma. Treatment should be ended very slowly with the availability of booster sessions as needed. Stan should receive ongoing support to help him avoid relapse. The last two characters that we're going to explore are Hub and Garth. We're going to look at these two together because they spent much of their lives together. Hub and Garth are brothers who have pretty much done everything together. In their younger adult years, Hub took on a protective role for Garth, especially after they got forced into service in the French army.
Oh, yeah.
However, in the later adult years, this switches, and Garth seems to be the one looking after Hub. Part of this could be because Hub has gotten stuck. Hub seems to have progressed normally through the developmental stages. Unlike May, as a middle adult, he found true intimacy and established a close relationship. However, Hub got stuck in his grief when Jasmine died. Up to this point, he's been pretty resilient, but when Jasmine dies, he fails to draw on those strengths. He seems to not even want to draw on those strengths. He doesn't want to forget Jasmine, and he doesn't want to live life without her. So while to others he seems to go on with life, he hasn't ever really processed the grief, and he has lost his sense of meaning and purpose. For much of the movie, Hub is in this depressed state. While he should be dealing with the developmental crisis of integrity versus despair, he seems to be falling more on the despair side. In fact, he really doesn't feel like he has much of a reason for living anymore. It seems that he feels like he is just old.
We're both getting old, fixing to die any time. So if we kick off in the middle of the night, you're on your own. We outlived our time, brother. Kid at our age, this is as sporting as we get. Sadder than a couple of has-beens jabbing about the good old days. Those days are through, so we...
Garth, however, seems to be accomplishing the task of integrity more. He seems to find some purpose in caring for Hub. Garth appears to be highly resilient, as seen in how he responded to the challenges in young adulthood and how he is responding as an older adult. He also finds value in sharing stories of his life with Walter, and seems pleased that Walter is interested in listening. In this way, as well as in his willingness to invest in Walter's life, Garth shows the desire to leave a legacy. Hub's growth during the movie occurs through his interactions with the younger generations. He starts to see his purpose again when he interacts with the boys at the diner. He teaches them some important life lessons and takes the time to invest in their lives. We discover through this that Hub has a speech that every young man should hear. In this way, he leaves a bit of himself behind every time he gives it and, in a sense, achieves immortality. The true turning point, however, comes when Walter expresses his need for Hub. Walter shares that he needs Hub to be around to share the rest of the coming-of-age speech, and he also shares how much he and Garth both need Hub. When Hub truly embraces this, he is able to move beyond the grief from losing Jasmine and put his energy into truly living again. So let's talk about how we would counsel older adults like Hub and Garth. First of all, we need to be aware of some positive characteristics that are associated with aging well. And some of these characteristics include optimism, adaptability, resilience, a sense of responsibility for oneself, believing in personal power, that they have control, healthy self-esteem, involvement in meaningful relationships and projects, a history of work habits and skills, and potential for leadership and mentoring. We see a lot of these characteristics in Hub and Garth throughout the movie, and we see that this is helping them to actually age positively once they get past the depression and the stuckness that they are in. So counseling older adults like Garth and Hub really begins with treating them with respect, using words like Mr. and Mrs. And if they want you to call them something else, they'll let you know. Understanding their wisdom and expertise will go a long way in helping to develop a therapeutic relationship. And then when you get into counseling with them, you can help them focus on their interests, using tools that can help them see what are the things that they're interested in and how can they get into some more activities that they can enjoy. This is kind of what the salesman did that came back, and he'd always had been shot out before, and so he came back with something that he knew Hub and Garth would really like, and so they actually did buy it. And it's kind of where it sort of started changing things around for them, because they were doing things that were more interesting to them. Once they started participating in this and other activities, they both kind of started to move out of their depression a little bit more. Another thing that you can do with older adults is to utilize reminiscence and life review through guided autobiography or narrative therapy that helps them look at the meaning of their lives, help them to understand that their lives mattered and that they had an impact on the world. This also helps them see their resiliency. The narratives that you use can help them discover new meanings and transform some of the old meanings that they've given to situations. Life review can also help them deal with unresolved trauma and affirm that their experience and feelings matter. Another thing to remember when you're working with older adults is to focus on growth and development, not loss and decline. A strengths-based approach that puts the emphasis on their strengths and what it is that they can do instead of solely looking at the things that they are declining in and what they can't do anymore. At first, Hub is focused solely on his decline and the fact that he's getting older and the loss in his life. But once he's able to see that he can still grow and he's willing to embrace the challenges, he starts to see some improvement. Help them identify coping skills. Here's some good questions that you can use to help them see what were some of the healthy lifestyle choices, some of the culture and community support that they had. Statements like, in spite of this, you were able to achieve this, or you show me that you are a resilient person. Tell me more about your strengths and how you use them to adjust to life events. Also using things like regular exercise and physical activity. And we see Hub and Garth both involved in exercise and physical activity. And we also see them involved in horticultural therapy, which is really funny because at first they're like, we're planting a garden because that's what old people do. But really there's a reason for that because it's a great beneficial thing that can help them to still have some meaning and help them to have some purpose. And especially when it's multi-generational, which is what we see happening in the case of Hub and Garth when they're doing the garden with Walter. They're able to do it together, a multi-generational project. And that's something that can really help also. Another thing to remember is that we should explore issues of religion and spirituality, issues of faith. Ask them the extent that faith has played in their lives. And even if faith isn't important or hasn't been important to them, it still might be a good thing that you want to address, especially as they look at end-of-life issues. You could really have some meaningful discussions around the role of faith in their lives. A part of aging well is achieving a sense of joy, satisfaction, and fun. And counselors can encourage clients to identify these activities and that support these important aspects of life. Thank you for staying with me through my analysis of the characters of Secondhand Lions. It has been an interesting process for me to take what I've been learning about human development and counseling and to apply it to these characters. It has also challenged me to look deeper into what could be causing issues in a person's life, to develop greater empathy for people that society would often cast aside, and to see how a counselor could possibly help in each situation. I am reminded of the verse in the Bible that says, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." As counselors, we need to see the potential in our clients and not get stuck in the problems so that we can help them move forward in their lives, so we can help them really live.
So, the two men from great-grandfather's stories, they really lived?